Welcome to Building 101, the ultimate guide to building in Minecraft. Immerse yourself in the complete series, now condensed into a full movie edition that combines all 6 episodes in one convenient place. Dive deep into the creative process from planning, colour schemes, architecture, roofing, detailing and so much more. Whether you're aspiring to be a building pro or just craving some chill vibes with helpful tips, this video has got you covered. So kick back, relax and let Building 101 be your guide on the definitive journey to becoming a master builder. The first video will be looking at the start of the process, build planning, size and shape. Before we get started in the video, please take the time to hit that like button and hit that subscribe button if you're not already, so that you won't miss out on any future episodes. It's free and it really helps the channel. Now this may seem like an obvious one, but knowing what you want to build is an important first step. If you have a clear vision of what you're looking to achieve, then the finished outcome is going to be much better than if you just start placing blocks. If there's a certain style that you're looking for, then maybe look at some reference pictures online to give you some ideas, understand what the purpose of your build is, and if you're just looking for an aesthetic reason or if you want to use the build itself in a particular way. Once you've got a clear view in your head of what you're looking to achieve, then you're ready for the next step. The phrase location, location, location also rings very true in Minecraft, as there are 3 different dimensions that you could choose to build from, and within those dimensions any number of different biomes and biome combinations that might fit your build. It's also important to understand the geography to make sure that your build will fit in, and also whether you've got enough space so that you can actually do everything that you'd like to do. Because of this, it's worth exploring and looking around at the various different terrains and various different areas that you could build in, just to make sure that you've picked things that are right, because there is a huge variety of possibilities. Another thing to actually understand is the direction of your build, and what I mean by that is shown here. So as you can see, we've got a house here that looks lovely, just a pretty basic house, same kind of starter house that many people might build. I've built this and I'm using shaders here, and I've built this so that the sun will catch it and it looks fantastic in the shaders. Now over here we have exactly the same house, but as you can see it's just built in a slightly different direction. Because of where the sun is in Minecraft, particularly with shaders, this will never ever get the sun on the front of the building. So again, it's very important to make sure that you are getting the right direction, the right location and the right terrain in order to start your build process. Size and shape are the next things to consider once you know what you're building and where you want to build it. And I've hopped onto my Japanese creative world to show you what I mean. So the first thing that I'm going to be talking about is scale. A Minecraft block, as you probably know, is 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter if it were in real scale. So you can scale your builds to the real world if you wanted to using the blocks. However, you're obviously not going to be able to get so many details in. It's not quite going to match up, because when you've got meter scale things, then thin walls, partitions, stuff like that is always going to look a little bit strange. You can, however, scale your builds up and make use of some of these blocks to give you more detail, more depth, and things like a more rounded pillar that you've got on this particular Torii gate here. Then using some of the things like the trapdoors, you can carry that on round the bottom. So once you've picked your scale, then you can think about the size of the build as well. So again, all of these are Torii gates, but as you can see, they come in a variety of shapes and sizes. So you need to know that you have got enough space in terms of the footprint around your build. So you need to know roughly what size it is. Are you building a little tiny small starter house, in which case you won't need much space? Or are you building a giant mega base, in which case you'll probably need tens if not hundreds of blocks in each direction to work out what you're going to build? Here we have an example of this in the pagoda in front of us. Now this has got a 29 by 29 footprint, so this is actually quite a big build, and obviously it goes quite high up as well. So if you're building this on top of a mountain, then you need to make sure that you've got enough space at the top so that nothing interferes with it. Again, if you wanted to build it in a cave, you need to understand the height, you need to understand the dimensions on the floor, you need to think about things like, is there going to be an overhang for a roof like this? Alternatively, you might want a pagoda, but you might want something that's considerably smaller. So you might want something that's a bit more like this, which has only got a 19 by 19 footprint and is significantly shorter. So understanding what the scale is and what the size of your build is going to be lets you work out what rough area you want for the footprint, and then you can start on the next stage of planning. Laying out your builds is a great way to make sure you understand more about what the finished result will look like. It lets you experiment with different ideas, and it means that if you're using something like Creative or World Edit and you choose to use something like Wool, you can quite easily replace this with the right blocks that you're actually going to use and try different combinations of things. If you're in survival, using something like Dirt or Netherrack is quite useful because it allows you to place blocks that are easily removable and switch things around if you've got different ideas that you want to try out. So if we were, for example, creating a starter house, we might first of all just create a simple box like this. Now this gives us an idea when we stand on the ground or stand inside of what kind of space that we're going to be working with and what we might want to do with things. It's not a very interesting shape, so once you've got something like this, you might want to add some additional areas to it. But again, you can do this using your wool. So you might say, okay, I'm going to use some wool here, and I'm going to come out and create a little annex or extra portion on the back of the build here. That makes it already much more interesting. So say that this is the front. You might say, okay, I want to have a nice entranceway, so let's have a front coming out like this. And let's make it so we've got a nice double door in the middle, so we're going to have it 2 wide like so. And by adding these on and using this the wool method to actually put your frame in place, you can start to really get some interesting outcomes with what you're looking to build. So let's add another section on the end for just a little overhang bit. And what I've noticed here is we've actually built ourselves something that's got a 2-block center. Now for doing a roof and things like that, it's generally not the best. So what we'll do is we will move our wall about like this, and then we can make sure that we've got ourselves a 1-block center when we do have the roof coming across the middle. And just little things like that, being able to assess what you're actually doing as you go, makes it so much easier when you come to the build, because you've got your basic structure to work from. You're not working from nothing. Now, the builds themselves, when you're looking at a single build like this, you can also quite easily come up and say, okay, how tall do I want it? Do I want it to be this tall? No, that's a little bit too tall, so we come across like this and we add our frame right the way round, which not only gives us an idea of the floor plan, but can also give us an idea of the structure. And by doing this, you can check out the different heights that you actually want to use for the different sections. So if this is going to be an entranceway, let's say we don't want it to necessarily come all the way up. So let's link that up, and you can see that you've got a height differential there with your main area. Standing in front of the build, you get a good idea of what it is. I'm going to be walking through here, so we can knock through this. I'm going to be coming into the build. There's not going to be this stuff here. It's going to come up this height, so we're going to have a wall that comes up like this. And yeah, I can now see that I've got space. I can have a little storage area in here. I can have all my crafting. You know exactly what you're working with. When it comes to planning villages or towns or anything slightly more complicated than just a simple house, then that's really when the layout of your build does come into its own. So as you can see here, we've set out a little settlement, and we've got a wall going around the outside. We've got ourselves a nice little entranceway here. And then we've also got various different things, a place that we've got with a lighthouse here, so you can use then the terrain to say, what do I want to do? We've got like some little fishing huts down here on the edge, and then we've got this big castle here. It's also, what I've done here, you'll notice, is I've brought everything for each build up to the same level. And then you can actually understand how the height difference is in the ground that you're actually building on, because you can't always build on flat ground, because in real life that doesn't really happen so much. But by bringing everything up to the same level, you can see where you will need to make allowances for these different heights. And yeah, for things like this one, you can see that, well, actually you could have a floor that's 1 level beneath and some windows potentially here or a back entrance. And yeah, by bringing everything up to that same level, you can see how things are. It's also good when you are planning something like this to make sure that you mix up the shapes that you've got. So we've got some basic square type shapes and rectangular type shapes. And what I've also done is I've thrown in some angled builds as well. Some on 45 degrees, like the majority of the castle here. Some on different angles. Now, I will be covering angled builds and curves and things like that in a later episode of this series, so make sure that you do subscribe for that. But as you can see here, it gives a real nice idea of where everything needs to go. Obviously, you won't necessarily be flying around, but if you are in survival, what you can just do is simply pillar up and have a nice bird's eye view on exactly what you're looking to create. The other thing that you can do when you are creating builds like this is you can use the wool in the same way to actually understand a little bit about the height that you want the builds to be. So here we've got a nice circle, which, as I said, could be something like a lighthouse. What you can do is you can pillar up with the build and with the wool in the middle, and that can give you just an idea of how tall you want it to be. So you might look at that and be, actually, it needs to be, if it's a lighthouse, it needs to be a bit taller. So working again in the 3 dimensions like you might do, and have something here to say, well, it's meant to be a tower, so up here I still want to be able to see it as I'm coming across here. So that's a really nice build, and that's a good height that we're going to have, maybe even a little bit taller, because we can have that. And that starts giving you some structure. It gives you an idea of the variance in the height, because when you are planning your builds, again, try not to make them all at the same height. If you've got something like a little town or a settlement here, then obviously there will be some that will be similar heights, but it's the variation. If you go and look around real buildings, apart from specific lines of terraces, or if you're building something like that, there is quite a lot of variation in things like roof height. So consider that when you're building things out. So in terms of the first step of getting your build planned, choosing where you want it to be, choosing which direction you want it to be, the size and the scale that you want for your build specifically, and how you can lay that out. That's covered everything for this first episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please do make sure that you leave a like and a comment if you have. There will be more of these episodes coming out, and as I said, they'll be stepping through the other areas of the building process. But if there is something specifically that you want me to cover, let me know in the comments beneath, and I'll make sure that I can put that in a future video. In this video, we will be looking at colours, block palettes and gradients. The first thing to cover is some colour theory. This is a colour wheel. It was originally developed by Sir Isaac Newton as a way to relate colours after light was split by a prism, and has been used ever since by artists and designers to work out which colours will go together. Colours basically that are close on the wheel will work together as they share a similar wavelength, and this version also includes shades of those colours, with darker versions in the centre and lighter tones at the edge. Translating this to Minecraft, the current colour blocks in 1.17 come out something like this. I'll be making a Java World download available via my Discord, so make sure you do check out the link in the description for that. It's useful to know the primary colours, which are red, blue and yellow. Now these form the basis for all other colours, and by that I mean that you mix these together to get anything else. So for example, red and blue gives you purple, blue and yellow obviously gives you green, and red and yellow gives you orange. And those 3 colours that I've just mentioned are also interesting because they also become what are known as complementary colours for the colours that are the primaries. And red and green and blue and orange are complementary colours for each other, as is yellow and purple. And an example of yellow and purple being used currently in the game is actually in End Cities, where you've obviously got the end stone, which is yellow, and you've got the purple, which is the purple blocks there. So these are colours that will equally go very well together, even though they are very different. So they don't share the same sort of hues, but they are very, very different, and they work very, very well together. And you find these within your colour wheel by basically going to the opposite side. So you can see that this blue here is obviously, there's different tones of the blue, but the blues are opposite the oranges. The yellows are opposite the purples here, and the reds are opposite all of these greens. And simply what you want to do is, if you've got a particular block palette that you think you might want to be using, let's say we chose the lime concrete that we wanted to be using, we would head across and go opposite that, and we'd actually say, okay, let's grab ourselves some concrete powder and some magenta wool and see if we can get these to go together. And when we put these down, as you'll see, they work fantastically together on both of those fronts. So that's how you find your complementary colours. They're really, really useful to use in a combination with going with colours of the same kind of a hue, to make sure that you've got a colour palette that is varied but also does look really, really good together. Grayscale is the next thing that we're going to cover, and that is all of these blocks here that don't have a specific pigment. So as you can see over here in the color wheel, you've got all of these blocks and they have a specific color. These blocks here are kind of the absence of color, really. So what we're looking at is everything through from whites through all of the grays up until the blacks. And the lightest block that we have in the game is the snow block, with the darkest being the black concrete. As you can see, you can lay them all out, going from light to dark right the way through all of these blocks. There's one other thing to consider though when you are thinking about greys, and that's not all greys are the same. You've actually got three types of grey. You have what is known as a cool grey, you've got what's known as a neutral grey, and you've got what's known as a warm grey. Now the cool and the warm are pretty self-explanatory, where you've got something that looks a bit colder like this snow block where it's got a little bit of blue in the texture. That's a cool block. Where you've got something that's got a bit of warmth in the texture like the bone block there, that would be a warm grey, and that would fit in the warm spectrum. Same with the mushroom block, and then you can see it with the lodestone, you've got more of the blues in there. And then next to that you've got a stone, which is probably more of a neutral, so something that isn't strongly one way or the other is a neutral. And by not just matching the darkness level of these blocks, but also matching whether it is a cool tone, you can get some fantastic looking gradients and really up that to the next level within your builds. And I'll show you some of the examples of that when we get to the gradient section there. Moving on now, here we have a lovely little castle. And the next thing that I'm going to talk to you about is contrast. Now, where we had the grayscale, where it moves from the light to the dark there, that is what's known as the contrast. So you have dark things contrast more to light things. In this build, although it looks like a fantastic castle, it's got everything that you could need. You've got your crenellations, you've got your little living quarters, you've got actually a full interior on here as well. What it doesn't have is any light or dark variation, so there's very little contrast in this. And what that means is when you look at the build, it just, all of the bits, like here, the depth, there isn't any depth. You can't see a line between any of the front or the back. There's no foreground or background to this build, and it makes it look like it's just kind of a big blob of colour. And when we look at the block palette that we've got here, you can see they are all very, very much the same tone. So we have got different blocks in here, but because they are all around the same lightness level, then when we look at this, it doesn't stand out as much as we would like for a build. Now, if we just come across here, by changing up some of the blocks and not needing to change up many, we've still got the same base colours there, and just adding a bit of colour at the end, moving to some darker woods, so we've got some stripped spruce and we've got some dark oak planks here, you can get an entirely different feel to your build. And you'll immediately see, putting these two together, that this one on the right stands out so much more than the one on the left, and that is because of the contrast that we've used in the build. So when you're thinking about your block selection, when you're thinking about your block palette, make sure that you are considering a mixture of light and dark tones within your build, because that is the things that draw the eye. Here, now we can immediately see where the roof finishes and where the building behind is, so we've already got the idea of the depth coming through. We've got these windows here that have got the dark oak fences in there, and we've got something that stands out, draws your eye. We've got the splash of colour with the banners and the flag on top. So you can see that these two, even though there's very, very little actual difference in there, you can just make such a big change by changing up some of the colours that you've used in an identical build. And these are literally block for block identical. There's no difference. They're in the same biome. There's nothing that you need to think about there. What you can do is actually take this a little bit further. So you can have the same build and you can also get a massively different feel by changing the blocks even further. So depending on where you are here, we've got some warped nylium as the basis rather than the green. And because this is a slightly different color, you can get a very, very different look by changing the blocks. We've still got a mixture of the lights and darks there, so we've still got appropriate contrast with this black stone, and then we've thrown in some of the acacia here, and that gives us the contrast ratio that we want. You can still see the same depth, but you get an entirely different feel to the actual build itself. So make sure when you're selecting your colours that you're also considering the overall feel that you want for the build. Here, do you want it to be a warm build? Do you want it to be a cold build? There's no... You get a slightly jarring effect, for example, if you were in an icy biome and you started using reds and oranges and warm tones there. It wouldn't necessarily fit within that environment. Here as well, we've got some warmth because there's a little bit of orange that, as you can see when you get close to the texture, and inspecting the textures kind of helps a little bit. You've got some of the warmer colours in here, so you know something like an acacia, which is actually a complementary colour to this cyan anyway, because it's on the opposite side of the colour wheel, will go really well together. And so you can mix up the colours, get a very, very different feel. And again, the final version of this, to show you that you can completely go wild with this and get some incredibly different effects, is to look at this with a light version. So here you've got kind of, you could imagine this in a mini game, for example, as two sides. You can have the dark side and the light side here as their bases for respawns and things like this. But exactly the same build, just mixing up the blocks themselves and making sure that you've got things that fit the environment. So here we've got a black stone floor. We've used some significant contrast between the floor and the start of the build, which is also something to note. You don't want your build, unless it's an organic, of course, and I'll be covering those in a later episode, you don't necessarily want the build to completely blend into the environment. You want to know when you're looking at something where the build starts, so that your eye can pick it out, and your eye can immediately see the edges of this. You can immediately see the roof line, you've got the depth and everything that you would need in here. The other thing that's been done in this build is we've actually got a mixture of warm tones. So this is a warm grey, or in the warm grey scale, with the quartz, and then we've got something with the calcite that's actually in the colder, or probably sort of neutral to cold side of this. Now, in order to get these to work together, if you put them right next to each other, they'd look okay, but having something like this block here, like the ancient debris, to split them up means that you can transition between different types of tone. So having a barrier there gives you that ability. On one side, your eye's focusing on this, and you don't necessarily, even though it's part of the same build, you don't necessarily associate it in the same way as if it was right next to the quartz. So that's a really good way, just a little tip to help you up your builds and be able to use these different colors together, because again, this is being more neutral, fits in with the more neutral to cool tone that we've got with this deep slate here. Now, the other thing that I'm just going to mention here, but watch out for a future video on this in more detail, is around... So I've mentioned it there. If you've got a big open wall or some space like this that you're not going to put any detailing like a window or anything on, you may want to add some block variations. So that's mainly for when you come up close and you see the build, to make it interesting. The further away from a build you get, the more the wall as a whole blends together, which is fine, because again, we'll be covering that in the detailing section, the mid, foreground and the background idea. Sometimes you can break things up with some details, but you may want to add in some block variation. That's entirely up to you how much of that you do. It doesn't need to be a crazy amount of blocks. You could have a space like this and you could have maybe 3 blocks in there. So if you had, say, stone and you put in 3 andesite, that's actually enough to break up the wall. A lot of people do go a little bit over the top sometimes with block variation, but it is your personal choice. It is what you like. And in some builds, so an example being the futuristic builds here, then you can actually see that I haven't used any block variation at all. I'm looking for a hyper-futuristic look with these blocks, and so I've gone for something that's really, really clean. I've used the smooth quartz as well as something that doesn't have an edge to it, so it all blends in together, but that is because that was the look of the build that I was going for. So consider that when you're selecting the blocks that you've got, and also you don't need to go over the top. The block palette that you select is just to give you an indication of where to start. So maybe select a couple of primary blocks and a secondary block that you want to use, and here you can see the difference in the tone between these two when they're next to each other, and then use some of the other blocks to give you that contrast and that pop of color. One of the most popular things in the game and in the art world at the moment is the use of gradients. Now, a gradient or a colour transition allows you to gradually move from one colour or one contrast level, so one tone, through to an entirely different one. And it takes your eye on that journey as you move through various different tones, various different textures, various different colours to the final result. And these can be really, really useful and really, really powerful, not just in builds, but if you're also doing any terrain or terraforming within your world, as they are very organic. They show that kind of movement there. They can go, as shown here, from something dark like this cobblestone to something light like this light grey concrete powder. Or they can go the other way, so you can move from something like this and a site at the bottom here through to this. I believe that's the cracked deep slate tiles, which are again a very dark tone there. So you can move either way through these gradients, and they can be either grayscale, so we used the light to dark and dark to light from the grayscale thing, or they can actually use the colours as well. So this one here shows us a transition through from the different wood types. This is actually the spruce logs, and then it goes through the other block type. So this is the dark oak, the spruce, and then through to the oak, and finishing off in the birch. You can transition from one colour to another within your build. And also something like this, for example, would be really, really good if you were looking to create a beach or a river. You can have the edge, which is going to be much lighter and going through to the dark. So you can add further depth to your builds, even when you've got a flat surface or a surface that doesn't have a massive amount of variation in depth, by using a gradient. So it's almost an artificial amount of depth that you can give, because your eyes consider things that are dark to be further away than things that are light. So you can almost force some perspective on the people who are viewing your builds. There's three main things to consider when you're actually looking at creating your gradients. The first one is how far away are you looking to look at this from? So the first of these gradients we looked at, you can be quite close to that and you can still you can still see and get the benefit from the gradient. Something like this, where you've thrown in some blocks that are a bit more unusual, like the birch or like the coal ore at the bottom and some of the diorite, they actually work better the further away you get from them. So you can see the transition starting to happen, and that is where gradients really do come into their own, is things that you're looking at from a distance. The other thing that you need to consider is the scale. If you've only got a build that's 4 blocks tall, you're not going to be able to go from black to white very easily in that. It's going to be quite jarring. So the more space you have for you to add this gradient, this color transition in, the easier it becomes, and potentially the more blocks you can feed in. So when you know the distance that you're planning on viewing this space from, and what color you want to go from and to, and the space that you have, then you can start thinking about your gradients. And one of the things is practice makes perfect. Just start mixing up the blocks. Start with things that are kind of smoother before you try and jump straight in with things that are a bit more difficult to use in terms of the textures. But as the practice level goes up, you will start to see that you can get into some much more interesting things here. So you can go just quite dark, and again, this is one that looks quite good close up. And I've used some shulker boxes in there because they're one of the interesting blocks, because they've got a natural transition from darker at the bottom to lighter at the top when you place them in that orientation. However, as they are entities, the further away you get, it gets to a point when they suddenly pop, disappear out of existence. So consider that when you are using different blocks in the game, particularly when you're using shulker boxes in your transitions. But they are a great way to move from one tone to another very, very smoothly, particularly if you've not got much room. So here you could actually get quite a good transition over the course of maybe even just 3 or 4 blocks. Just those 3 blocks, you don't actually need much more space. So consider that with your build. You can obviously keep it within the same color, or when you have practice, you can do some things that are much, much more difficult. You can make some transitions through multiple colors. So this takes us actually from the deep slate diamond ore through to the regular diamond ore. This is one that, again, is better used and looked at from a distance, but when you look at it from a distance, it looks really, really interesting. It gives you a really, really nice vibe there. And this is using quite a lot of unusual blocks like terracotta blocks, like warped blocks, and of course the ore blocks as well with the shulkers. So yeah, keep practicing and you can get some good gradients going on like this. You can transition between colors here, like we've got the yellow right the way through to the red. And this is probably just about the smallest scale that you can get that full transition in. And again, is mixing in some of the other more interesting blocks as well. And here we go from the blue, the dark blue with the glazed terracotta, right the way through to actual snow blocks at the top. So for a wintry type build, you can get some good gradients over some short distances. And yeah, again, these ones, the more complicated you get with your block palette, the more you need really that distance to be able to view those to look smoother. And we do have a distinct lack of blue blocks in the game, so I do wish Mojang would add some more blue blocks in the game, please. So yeah, that's how you can start thinking about your gradients. They will take practice, but if you keep at it, you will be able to get some fantastic effects. And there's no reason then, this is kind of quite an extreme example, that you can't go through the colors of the rainbow. I haven't mixed these up. Obviously, if you had more layers, you'd be able to transition better between these layers. But just looking at this, you can actually go right the way through the rainbow, through all of the blocks in the game, throwing in some of the slightly less usual ones, like we've got some slime blocks in there, which is a great transition between this line and between the copper. But yeah, you can get these, and this also uses the sponge blocks. I mean, how many times have people used sponge blocks in the game, particularly because they're quite difficult to get hold of? But if you are building in creative, then there's no reason you can't do that. In this video, we'll look at building on angles, curves, and organic builds. Make sure to check out the other episodes in the series covering build planning and colour and gradients. Before we go any further, make sure that you're subscribed and hit that like button, as it really helps the channel and means that I can make more content like this. First of all, building on angles. In the real world, there's not a lot of things that are actually built at a 90-degree angle. However, in Minecraft, obviously with the blocks, that becomes slightly more difficult. If you take the time and the effort to actually build some stuff up, like here in my solo survival base, just adding a couple of angled buildings can really add to the realism. The planning stage is the best place to actually start thinking about putting your angled buildings in. As you can see from the planning episode, we have put in a number of these buildings, and not only do they help to fill in some of the more awkward shapes, but they make the whole thing look significantly more natural as well, including this big castle where it's going to be entirely built on an angle. There are a variety of angles that you can choose to build in the game. When selecting the one that's right for you, there are three main things you need to consider. The first of them is the purpose of your build. Now, if you're building a base or something that needs a full interior, then building on an angle can be troublesome because you've got things like beds and walls and doors and staircases and chests that don't necessarily line up with what you want on the interior. If you are, however, just filling space in a village or a town, or looking to put something around a farm, then building on an angle is a much easier proposition because you don't need to worry about what's inside so much. It's just the outside that you're looking at. The next one is the size of your build. Now, simply put, the smaller your build, the fewer blocks you have to make your angle look good. So if you've got something that's only a 3x3 or a 4x4, you're going to struggle to get a really good looking build if you are using a complex angle, or even if you're using an angle at all. So consider the size of your build. Bigger builds look better with an angle because you've simply got more blocks that you can work with. And that brings us on to the third one, which is viewing distance of your build. Like I said, the more blocks that you've got, generally you are going to look at bigger builds from further away. But consider how far away you're expecting people to be looking at this build from. If you're looking at it close up, then you can get some real weird stuff happening with some of the more complicated angles, and you don't really want to have somebody coming up to something like this and thinking, well, that window just doesn't look right. There are more simple ways that you can get around that by doing things like shifting a wall out one block in each direction, and then if you were to put a door in, for example, up here, and some windows in, you've got some nice flat spaces that you can do that, and that doesn't interrupt your building process too much. You can still get the same or equivalent level of detail in. However, if you're looking at something from a long way away, the close-up details don't matter quite as much, and it's the general feel of the build that you're looking to get. So if you've got something that is further away, then you can choose a slightly different angle and you can make the most of that in your build. When you actually do get to building though, the key thing to consider is making sure that the angle on the side of your build is also mirrored by the angles on the end of your build. And by that I mean, if you take something like this and it were built out at a square level, so you had a 90-degree level like so, when you step back at it, it looks really weird because the angle on this side doesn't match the angle on the side there, and you could do the same on the other side and you just get a weird looking building. So make sure that the ends and the sides have got the same distance that you're moving, and the easiest way to do that is simply to choose how many blocks you're moving with. So you go, this one for example is 2 blocks and then across, 2 blocks and then across, and then mirror that on the ends as well. So you go 2 blocks and across, 2 blocks and across, and then you get some really nice effects. So something like this looks really good, as does the 3x3 that we've got over here. Now we're looking at circles and curves, and as you can see I've laid out some different sizes of circles here, but where it comes to circles and curves themselves, it really is all about the size. The bigger the size you have, the smoother you can have the curves on them, and also when you're making curves themselves you can smooth those out nicely with the blocks that we work with. Now I loosely use the term circles here that I've laid out because as you can see these first 3 are just squares, and it's only when you get to this 4 diameter circle that it really starts to be more of a circle design. However, you can get a 3x3 circle by taking out the corners and using either walls or using the glass panes or some fences if you wanted, or even some iron bars to actually curve your 3x3 round. And so you can get inventive with the blocks to give yourself a more curved effect as you're building things. So have a consideration for the blocks that you're using and how you want to use them to actually make the curves. Now there are a number of resources, including the one that is on the screen now, that you can use to find the sizes of the circles that you might want. There's also a pixel, circle and oval generator that if you search for Minecraft Circle Maker, that you will find as the very first link, which is quite good. You just put in the size that you want there. So there are a number of ways that you can use that to get your circles. Now, circles are great in the game. They add something a little bit different, like the angles do, to what you're building, and they can look good as towers and obviously as futuristic buildings and all sorts of things, chimneys. Where it comes to curves, again, using the same theory that we had before, that actually not everything is a right angle. You want to build walls and fences and things like that that don't necessarily go in a straight line. Look at the terrain in Minecraft. None of it really goes in a straight line for much, so you can actually build some curves. Again, if you're using tools like World Edit, they can create the curves for you, or there is a method that you can create your own curves, and I'll show you that now. That is, you take one point and you add a second point in there, and you might say, well, that's just a straight line at the moment. Well, that's how every curve starts. Then you work out where you want your curve to go. So let's have this as quite a big curve. So let's have it coming out here. And you put a block somewhere in the middle and say, okay, I want my curve to go through that block. The next thing that you do is you take each of these as their own mini curve and say, where do I want this to go? Okay, let's go about here for the curve to kind of keep coming out and round, and do the same over here like so. And that one's not in the right place. As you step back each time, you can kind of get more of an idea of where you want the curves to meet up. And then you just keep filling in somewhere in the middle until you get something that actually matches what you're looking for. So there you go. We'll have one there. That's obviously going to be a straight line. We'll have a line there, and then we'll go like this and have that coming round. And then once you get to the point you can fill these blocks in, you can start coming out with something that gives you the curve shape that you actually want. So that's the best way that I've found to do them myself without using any tools. But yeah, that's how you can add curves to your builds. Now we're going to start talking about building organics. First of all, we're going to cover a little bit of the theory on shapes. So there are 2 types of shape in the world. There are geometric shapes, and a great example of this is this lovely blue cube here, which we have. All of the sides are straight, all of the sides are the same length, they have the same angle in between them at 90 degrees, and it would be easy to replicate this because everything could be mathematically calculated. On the other side of that, you have organics. Organics are things that, due to their very nature, are normally very irregular. There's a lack of symmetry, they're unique, there's lots of curves, and they're pretty much anything that you might find in nature. So what you have to deal with in Minecraft is the challenge of taking something that is a geometric shape, like these cubes, and turning it into something that looks more realistic and more like what you would find in nature. The problem is, obviously, all of this stuff that you find in the game needs to be generated with code. The people at Mojang have done a fantastic job at turning some of these code into things like curves and mountains and undulating land and things like that. However, where it comes to something a bit more complicated like a tree, there's only so much that they can do. So building organic shapes in your world and building organics in your world can bridge that gap between the Minecraft world that's generated by procedure and also nature, making things look considerably more realistic. The first example of this that most people come across is the tree. As you can see here, this is an oak tree in Minecraft the game. However, if I flash up on screen some images of oak trees in real life, you can see that there are some significant differences. First of all, the trunks themselves are very, very much not symmetrical. They're not just a straight line. The leaves and the leaf pattern is much more irregular as well. There's no symmetry in it, and you can see through to the branches and the trunk through the leaves themselves. So this is something that you can actually replicate in the game. And if we look over here, I've created a couple of custom oak trees here to demonstrate what you can do. So by looking at the reference pictures, you can actually take some of the cues that you see in nature and apply them to the game. Obviously, not everything will be flawless because we are still using these 1x1 cubes with the leaves and things like that. But utilizing some of the other blocks in the game, such as some of the slabs and the stairs and also some fences, you can create something that looks a little bit more irregular, a little bit more unique. And then once you've created your trunk, and that would be my suggestion whenever you're building a custom tree, is get the block palette and start building your trunk and then add the leaves to that. Make sure that you leave, pardon the pun, lots more holes and gaps looking through so you can actually see the branches themselves. And you can get some really, really nice results with these custom trees. And then just by creating a couple of these designs, flipping them around along the X and the Y axis, you can actually then create some really nice forests that do look much more natural than what you might find in the game. And this will really, really elevate your builds massively. Once you've got used to building one type of tree, you can branch out to other styles. So these are a more Japanese style based around some larger bonsai trees. And yeah, you've got the 3 different sizes and they look very different from the angles wherever you're looking at it from. Then over here I've got a number of different size spruce trees. So for organics, they are the best and easiest way that you can start adding some more realism to your builds and make things look much, much better. It's worth noting that if you're interested in seeing these specific trees that I've got here, the world will be available for download for this video, so check it out in the description down below. Of course, aside from trees, there's a variety of other ways that you can use organics to bring your base to life. This includes adding animals to complement what's already in the game. These are some of the sea creatures that I've placed around some of my underwater builds in the past, and there are some tutorials for these on the channel, but I would say that the key with anything that exists in nature already is looking at references and using them as the basis for what you're building. If you want something a little more fantasy themed, you could add other creatures from mythology, like this giant tree monster I recently built. With creations like this, you can simply let your imagination run wild. Another great way to use organics is landscaping and terraforming, which I'll be covering later in the series. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on that. Today we're going to be looking at build composition and detailing. Before we go any further, hit that like button and subscribe for an instant boost to your building prowess. First, let's cover off a little bit of theory. A focal point is the area of any composition that's created to draw in the viewer. It's where in the image that your eyes will land before travelling through the rest of the composition. Look at this picture. I bet the first thing that you noticed was the red apple. Now that's a very obvious example, but how about this painting by Monet? You were drawn to the boat, right? Less blatant, but equally effective. One final painting you might know. Were you drawn to the centre of the chest before moving up to the face? Each of these images has been deliberately designed to make you notice one particular element first. It adds interest to the image and makes the viewer feel more of an emotional connection to it. It's done by creating difference or contrast in the composition. Let's have another look at the three images. In the first one, the difference is created by colour. Although they're all apples, by varying the colour of one, it immediately draws your eye to it. In the second, this one uses darkness to create the contrast at the bottom of the boat, which is almost irresistible. Finally, the third image uses light. This spot in the centre of the chest is the brightest part of the image. It's also in the dead centre of the painting. However, with this one it's a little bit more subtle, as your eye lands on the light and there's little there to hold it. It searches for the next thing to look at, and that brings it directly to the most famous smile in the world. But why does this matter for Minecraft? Aren't builds three-dimensional? Yes they are, but as a builder you can decide where you want people to see the things from. Like you can put in paths, or which directions you want your windows to point at the builds from. Alongside this, the buildings themselves can use colour and contrast, which were covered in episode 2 of this series, to put the viewer's eyes where you want them. Other ways you can do this are by using lines or light to draw people into your builds. You can also use areas of detail to achieve this. One important element to consider on focal points is, when there's too much going on, builds are difficult to take in as the eyes have too many things to focus on all at once. Many people think the more detail the better. This isn't true. This can make builds seem cluttered and too busy. It's normally better to pick a couple of major details that become the focal points of your build, as the mind will naturally fill in the details in the other areas around this within the peripheral vision. Alongside deciding focal points, the other thing that you need to think about is how far away you want people to be when looking at the build. This is known as the viewing distance and can be defined as far, medium, or close. At far distances, the person looking at the build will be able to see the full build, with the general sizes and shapes included, but they won't be able to see the smaller details. At this distance, entities such as signs and banners won't be visible. This distance also works especially well with gradients, as it unlocks a large variety of blocks that you can use. If the build is designed to be viewed at this range, then the details and shapes will need to be large to have an effect. Colours and contrasts will need to be obvious to create a visual impact. At medium distance you can still see the overall size and shape of the full build, but you'll also start to see some of the details coming into view. Entities will also come back into view at this distance and then can be used for decoration. Dependent on the size of the build, you might not be able to see it all at once. Using gradients will also be largely effective, however, you need to use a more limited block palette as large transitions will be quite obvious. When building for this distance, you can focus on smaller scale shapes and subtle colour changes, but avoid using details that are too small or too many of them, as these will look busy and will be difficult to see. Finally, at close range you'll lose sight of the whole build and it will become abstract, with the details becoming more important to understand the purpose of the building. Blocks and details barely visible from other distances will have extra impact, but all but the most subtle gradients will look out of place. At this range, the player will be able to get different views of the build just by changing the direction that they're looking, which means more focal points can be utilised. Close viewing distance will include interiors on all but the biggest builds. For most builds you'll need to consider a combination of these three distances, so look at the build and see which parts will be visible from the three different ranges and plan your decoration accordingly. There's no point adding intricate details where they'll hardly be visible and will just make the build look too busy. Likewise, if the player is up close and personal to the build, then large blank areas will look too empty and out of place. That is, unless you're going for a style that embraces that, like minimalist or futuristic. One of the terms that gets used a lot is adding depth to a build, but what does this really mean? Adding depth is the process of making the build look less flat, and in a game of 1x1 meter cubes this is particularly important, as it can be easy to create overly smooth looking areas. However, the fact that the game is 1x1 meter cubes also means that it's easy to go overboard and make things look too unrealistic. Many builders overly exaggerate details and depth to the point of them being caricatures of actual buildings and more cartoony. Walls aren't 6 meters thick in reality. If this is what you're going for, then it can add to the look, but in many cases people wonder why their builds don't look quite right, and this is often the cause. Adding depth can be done in a variety of ways that don't require making the walls thick with 2 Cs. One good way to do this is to use lighter and darker colours to create false shadows and depth. Light colours and blocks naturally look like they're further away, and you can use this visual illusion to create the effect you want. By using subtle or deliberate colour changes, you can make it look like there's more depth than actually exists. This works best at medium and far viewing distances. When it comes to blocks and their uses in decoration, there's too many to go through in one video, but I'll cover off some of the major groups. Stairs can either be placed the regular way up or upside down. That gives you some great options. They can also be linked together. This is both the regular direction and upside down as well. And they can also be curved round, so you can get some really nice patterns from those. And they give you 2 layers of depth with stepping back through the stair itself. You can also use them to link up and create some nice loops and patterns. So this has got a single block size through the middle of this. For slabs, these are great because you can utilize the space in different ways. You can place these either the top or the bottom of a block, and by stepping them up and stepping them down, you can use those to create some additional depth and some interesting spaces. You can also use them to create these half slab platforms that have got a full block in between by alternating whether you put them on the top or the bottom. Next, walls, they can be placed individually or in lines. Once you get above a line of 2, you will have this flat section on top of a wall unless it is connected to something. And then once you place another thing on top of that, it will fill in the little gap that you have here. So as soon as you do that, you will move the gap upwards. If you don't have anything behind the wall, you will continue to have this flat section, or you don't have a full block. So by using something like stairs that we've got here, you can add a flat area that looks like it's attached to the wall. And the best thing about walls is they can be used in a recess in a full block to add a significant amount of depth without costing you an additional block's width here. Fences on the whole are very similar to walls because you can place them individually or you can place them against a full block, and when you do, they'll connect up to that full block. The one weird fence that we have is the nether brick fence, which won't connect to any other fences, and this can be used for some really nice decorative patterns because you can put different types of fences and yeah, they won't connect up. And you can also put fences within recesses like you can for walls, and you can get a nice element of depth to your builds by doing this without costing an extra block. Walls and fences will not connect together naturally. However, if you use a fence gate, you can get these to connect up, and also between the regular and the nether brick fences as well in that way. However, you get this transition when it moves from a fence to a wall as it drops the fence gate down for some reason, but this can also be used for some really nice decorations. Next, glass panes and iron bars. These work very similar to each other. That's why I've used them together. They will connect up individually, and once you've gone beyond 2 panes, you get a full pane in the middle with a half pane each side, or a half section of the iron bars. Now these can be connected for some nice effects to a full block, but again, as soon as you connect them to a full block, you do get these struts that come in the middle, which for me spoils the look a little bit, but you can get around that. They're great for putting into recesses and using for depths of builds, and they will connect up to walls, so you can get this triple depth effect for a single block. So you've got a full block, then the wall, then the glass pane, and you get these 3 obvious different transitions. Now they won't connect up to fence gates or fences, however they will connect up to each other, so you can use some really nice patterns. One other thing for the fence gates is that when you've placed them, you can actually open them in different directions and get a different look from a decorative standpoint. In my view, trapdoors are the best decorative block in the game. They can be placed on any side of a block, so you might place them like this and then you can flip them up or flip them down, so you can have lots and lots of variation on how you can physically place them. Some of them are see-through, so you can actually get a nice view of the block underneath as well, but some of them aren't, so you can actually create full walls out of these things themselves as well. So utilizing those 2 factors, they're brilliant for putting either onto blocks like this or in a recess, so you can create either a big gap or a small amount of depth, again for not much extra width. The iron trapdoor is the one different block which you can place on its side, but as soon as you put a redstone power through it, it will stand up, and that can't be changed unless you use something like a lever or a button, so that will be locked. There are some other blocks as well that you can place on any surface, and these are really useful for decoration because it gives you far more options. So for these, you have got the end rod, you've got the chain, you've got the new, well I say new, the lightning rod here, and you can also, there's some that people forget about, levers can go on any side, buttons can go on any side of a full block, and you can also place the grindstones and the amethyst shards, or amethyst buds rather, on any side of a block. So these are really, really useful and give you lots of decoration options. Now we have signs and banners. These are also really, really useful for decoration. So signs and banners can both be placed independently and at different angles. You can also then place them against a surface, and with signs you can place a sign against another sign and create these quite interesting bits that can stick out, and you can then carry on by shift clicking into that, create these weird and wonderful little patterns and decoration bits. Now with the banners, they will overlap. They also move slightly in the wind, and because only the top half of the block is the hitbox, you will place them like this and they can go into other blocks as well. So that also gives quite a nice touch. With the other blocks that you can place on walls, you have ladders, you have vines, you have these, the glow lichen, you have paintings and item frames, and then also you have mob heads. Now mob heads can also be placed on blocks, can have the blocks removed and be floating and be placed directionally. A lot of these, however, are entities, so if you get a certain distance away from these, like for example the banners and also the signs, they will disappear. So again, consider the viewing distance when you're using these. There are so many other blocks that can be used for decoration, such as sea pickles that can be placed on any surface, candles that can be placed on a surface and have that surface removed, and the flower pots that can be used independently as decoration or with flowers in. And then you've got things like, you've got the armor stand, you've got anvils, all sorts of blocks, all the ones that people know about, like leaves. These, which are of course the campfires, and the campfires can be put out by using either a water bottle or a splash water bottle or a shovel. And then you've got other things that you can use, such as the pointed dripstone and bells that can also be attached to blocks or sit independently. Really, the only thing that limits you with the blocks is to have a look at what is available and then just use your imagination, because even things like these stone cutters, because you can place them in different directions, can be used for some really, really interesting decorations. Then it comes to things like lanterns as well. These give off light and they can also be used independently as a decoration on their own. Factoring in everything that we've covered, hopefully that has given you lots of ideas of how you can better decorate your builds. This is one of my favourite patterns that I use for a fantasy style, where using the trapdoors and using the stairs, you can actually create these nice porthole-like circles in Minecraft, and that looks really, really effective. And when you look at the other side as well, given that this is only just over 2 blocks deep, you've got a really, really nice interior surface to your builds too. So that's another idea for you. But I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope it's been helpful. Today's episode is focusing on architecture, realistic building, and making recreations. Firstly, let's ask the basic question: what is architecture? Architecture is the art and science of designing and constructing buildings, structures, and environments. It's the process of turning these ideas and dreams into tangible spaces that can be both beautiful and functional. Think of architecture as a giant puzzle where the pieces are the materials, shapes, and colours that come together to form the spaces where we live our lives. Every time you walk into a building, whether it's a grand cathedral, a sleek skyscraper, or a cosy cottage, you're surrounded by the results of an architectural vision and the skill taken to make them a reality. Architecture shapes our surroundings and influences the way we live, work, and play. Now imagine being able to bring the same level of excitement and creativity to the world of Minecraft. By understanding the principles of architecture, you can turn your building projects from simple structures into stunning masterpieces. You'll be able to create functional and beautiful buildings that stand out both aesthetically and structurally. From designing your dream home to building a massive cityscape, architecture in Minecraft can elevate your building experience and take your creations to new heights. There are 6 fundamental principles of building architecture. These are functionality, proportion and scale, balance, light, materials, and context. We've already touched on some of these in the series, but let's bring them together and see how they can all relate to Minecraft builds. The first and most important principle of architecture is functionality. A building should serve its intended purpose, whether that's a place to live, work, or play. In Minecraft, the design of your building should reflect their intended use, such as providing a safe and secure home, a place to farm crops, or a storage area. This means you need to think about how the build will work with what you want it to do. Look at your purpose and make design choices in line with that. A secure house shouldn't be made of something easy to break like slime blocks, for example, and a storage area needs to be designed where you can actually reach all of the chests. Once you understand the purpose and functionality, you can make choices that complement this. Proportion and scale next refer to the relationship between the different elements of the building and the building itself. Proper proportion and scale can create a sense of balance and harmony in the structure, making it aesthetically pleasing and functional. In Minecraft, you can use this principle to design buildings that look good and feel right, with rooms that are the correct size for their intended purpose, and with windows, doors and other features that are in proportion to the overall size of the building and to the player themselves. Scaling up builds can make adding details easier, but it'll make Steve look very out of proportion. Balance is the distribution of visual weight within a building. It's achieved through the use of symmetry, asymmetry and radial balance, and helps to create a sense of stability and structure. For Minecraft, you can use balance to create aesthetically pleasing buildings that have a sense of solidity, shape and purpose to them, with evenly shaped windows and doors and a balanced distribution of materials and colours. Balance is what adds a sense of looking right to a build, where everything feels like it's in the correct place. Next, light. This is a crucial element of architecture and can have a significant impact on the mood, atmosphere and usage of a building. Architects use natural and artificial light to create spaces that are both practical and visually pleasing. In Minecraft, you can use light to create spaces that are well lit, to highlight important features of your building, and to create a sense of depth and atmosphere, as well as for functional purposes like preventing or indeed allowing mobs to spawn. The choice of materials used in building construction is an important architectural consideration. Materials should be selected based on their suitability, durability, and appearance, and they should be used in a way that enhances the overall design of the building. You can use a variety of materials in Minecraft to create buildings that are aesthetically pleasing, durable, and functional, with blocks like glass to prevent spawns, obsidian for toughness, and copper to show the passage of time. Architecture should be designed to reflect and respond to its surrounding environment, whether it's the natural landscape, the surrounding buildings, or the cultural context. This is achieved through the use of appropriate materials, colours and forms that are in keeping with the local context. In Minecraft, you can use this principle to create buildings or structures that reflect and complement these surroundings, with materials and colours that blend in with the environment and forms and shapes that suit where the build is. By incorporating these 6 principles into your building projects in Minecraft, you can create structures that are functional, beautiful, and reflective of their surroundings. These areas will stand the test of time, can wow your friends, and will provide a great gaming experience. There are a number of real-world architectural styles that you can use for inspiration in Minecraft to help you develop your skills and to give you ideas. Here are some of the most popular. The Gothic style was popular in Europe from the 12th to 16th centuries and is characterised by pointed arches, ribbed vaults and flying buttresses. Renaissance architecture originated in Italy in the 15th century and is best known for its symmetry, proportion and the use of the classical orders. A little later in the 17th century, Baroque also originated in Italy, and this is characterised by elaborate ornamentation, dramatic effects and grandeur. Drawing on the past, neoclassical became popular in the late 18th and early 19th centuries and drew inspiration from ancient Greek and Roman architecture, illustrated by simplicity, order and symmetry. The Victorian style was popular in the late 19th century and displays ornate details, steep roofs and asymmetrical shapes. Art Deco gained popularity in the 1920s and 30s and is defined by a use of geometric shapes, bold colours and new materials like steel and glass. Emerging in the early 20th century, modernism is characterised by the use of new materials like concrete, being highly functional and with an emphasis on simplicity. The Brutalist style emerged in the mid-20th century and can be spotted by its use of exposed concrete, strong geometric shapes and a rough, unfinished appearance. In the late 20th century, postmodernism saw a rejection of modernist principles, with its use of historical references and a focus on symbolism and ornamentation. The contemporary architectural style is characterised by an emphasis on sustainability, the use of new materials and technologies, and an interest in creating innovative and unique designs. It often incorporates elements of other styles, creating a unique blend of old and new. Building realistic structures in Minecraft requires a combination of creativity, planning, and attention to detail. Here are 3 steps that you can follow to start creating more realistic projects. Start by researching real-world architecture and taking note of the material shapes and colours used in the structures you're interested in. Once you have an idea of what you want to build, create a plan. This should include the size and layout of your structure, the materials you'll use, and any special features you want to include. Realistic structures in Minecraft often incorporate a range of different blocks and materials. Try to use materials that match those used in the real-world style, or experiment with colours and blocks to match the realistic look. Darker blocks work well to add realistic looking shadows. Stairs, slabs and other decorative blocks can create intricate designs and details, and you can use vegetation and landscaping such as custom trees to add to the realism of your build. Pay attention to the scale of your build in relation to the environment around it. Use appropriate block sizes to create a sense of proportion and realism. Add small details like doors, windows and shutters to make the build look more realistic. Consider adding lighting and other decorative elements to create a more immersive experience. Including structural elements can tie the build to the real world and the expectations that you have, making it feel much more realistic. Another way to improve your realistic building is to make recreations within the game. These can be buildings and structures from the real world or elements from concept art, fantasy, films, TV, popular culture, other games or books. Aside from looking great, making a recreation helps you begin to understand the creative process and the design choices that have gone into the original. It ultimately allows you to improve your own builds by learning from others and understand how you can get realistic effects. The best way to get started is to research the thing that you want to build. Look at pictures, videos, and maybe even blueprints. The more angles that you can get, the better it is to see how it will exist in 3 dimensions. Try to understand the scale of the build. Some slight tweaks might need to be made to the size of the build to take into account the Minecraft block size, but try to stick as closely as you can to the original scale for the most usable outcome. Understand where you might want to compromise on things like colours to achieve the shape that you want, or vice versa. Go for the overall feel and then try to refine your creation. Smaller scale builds can be very tricky, so start with something bigger at first to learn. Remember, building realistic structures in Minecraft takes time and practice. Don't be afraid to experiment and try new things until you find a design that you're happy with. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Today we'll be looking at everything you need to build amazing roofs for your Minecraft creations, including the theory behind roofing and some practical tips on making the best possible roof for your build. The first and probably most important thing to consider is the style of the build you're going for. For the roof to fit, it has to be something that will suit that style. For example, a cathedral may have a pointed spire and steep pitch, whilst a modern build might feature a roof that matches the materials of the rest of the build. Check out real-life references or concept art for ideas on what roof shape will best fit your build and the area you're creating it in. Make sure you have a clear idea in your mind of what you want before starting building the roof. Another element is making sure your roof design serves a functional purpose. It should protect the interior from rain and other environmental elements. Make sure to build this into your design decisions and considerations. For example, if you're building something apocalyptic or run down, you might want to deliberately leave some gaps or holes in the structure. Also consider incorporating overhangs or gutters to divert rainwater away from the building's walls and foundations. Tying your building to reality like this, even if it's a fantasy or concept building, will make it feel right and adds a great element of extra detail. There are some common roof styles that you should know about to help you make a decision on what will work best for your build. Here are 10 of them. A gable roof is one of the most common and recognisable roof styles, featuring 2 sloping sides that meet at a ridge forming a triangular shape. Gable roofs are straightforward to build and effectively shed rain and snow. They're popular in various architectural styles and climates. A hip roof has slopes on all 4 sides, with each side meeting at the ridge. It forms a pyramid shape. Hip roofs are known for their stability and ability to shed water and snow effectively. They're common in areas prone to high winds and heavy rain. A jerkin head roof, sometimes known as a half-hip roof, is a combination of a gable and hip roof, where the gable ends are clipped or hipped, giving it a unique and somewhat flattened appearance. Jerkin head roofs offer some of the stability advantages of hip roofs, whilst allowing for additional design creativity and space inside the attic. A flat roof has little or no slope, appearing nearly level. Flat roofs are popular for modern architecture and commercial buildings. However, proper drainage and waterproofing are crucial to prevent water pooling and leaking. A shed roof is a single sloped roof that slopes in one direction from one flat side of the build to the other. Shed roofs are simple and cost effective, and often used for additions, sheds and contemporary home designs. They're effective at shedding rainwater when they're properly sloped. A salt box roof is a variation of a gable roof with one side longer than the other, creating an asymmetric shape. This design is traditional in New England and offers more space in the building's upper level. It provides an interesting and historic look. A gambrel roof has 2 distinct slopes on each side, with the lower slope being steeper than the upper one, resembling a barn roof. A gambrel roof provides extra headroom in the attic or upper floor, making them common in barns or Dutch colonial style homes. A mansard roof has 4 sloping sides, with the lower slope being steep and the upper slope being almost or completely flat. Mansard roofs are known for their elegance and additional living space in the attic or upper floors. They're often associated with the Second Empire architectural style. A Dutch gable roof combines the features of a gable and a hip, with a smaller gable on top of a hip roof. Dutch gable roofs offer a decorative element while maintaining some stability, and they're used in various architectural styles for visual interest. A combination roof is a design that incorporates multiple roof types in a single structure, often for architectural diversity. This type allows for creativity and can be used to emphasize different parts of a building or accommodate different functions, such as a gable roof combining with a hip roof on an L-shaped house. Keep in mind that these are just some of the common styles of roof, and there are many variations and regional styles that exist that may be right for what you're looking for. The pitch of a roof is the degree of steepness or the slope of its surface, typically measured in terms of an angle or a ratio of rise to run, which is how many units it goes up for every one that it moves over. It serves the primary function of facilitating proper water drainage by allowing rainwater and snow to flow off the roof effectively. This prevents water building up, reducing the risk of leaks, structural damage, and the weight of snow causing a roof collapse. However, some roofs in colder areas have a deliberately lower pitch to catch the snow, which acts as an additional layer of insulation in the winter. On top of its functionality, the roof pitch plays a significant role in the aesthetics of a building and affects the choice of roofing materials, making it a critical factor in the overall design of a structure. Make sure to consider the dimensions and proportions of your structure to ensure that the roof fits well and looks balanced. Choosing appropriate blocks and materials for your roof is exceedingly important to get the look you want. Depending on the style and pitch, similar to the real world, you may be limited in the blocks that you can use, as not all block sets have wall and slab or stair variants. Experiment with different textures and colours to achieve the desired aesthetic, whilst maintaining structural integrity. Adding decorative elements can enhance the overall design. These may include dormer windows, chimneys, skylights, or decorative trim. Using different blocks and colours for accents and detailing can create depth, wear and tear, and visual interest in your roof design. If you're finding this video useful and you'd like to get more hints and tips from the channel, if you can hit that like button, let me know in the comments what you'd like to see. It would be most appreciated, and make sure you hit that subscribe button as well if you'd like to see more videos like this. Once you've got your structure and you've decided on the basics like the style, the pitch, and the block palette that you're going to use, you'll be ready to actually get roofing. So here I have a demonstration building to show you some of the pitfalls that people fall into and how that you can connect up some of the roofs and some tips for this. So this has got a gable that we're going to be building on the main portion of the house, but with an end wall, and what that means is the actual roof starts next to this wall and doesn't overhang on this section. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to come down here to the level that we want to build the roof up against, and we are going to start by placing a beam. Now this is my main tip for whenever you're building a roof. Take the largest and highest portion of the roof and build a beam across, so you've got something to actually start your build with. Now for this build I'm going to be accenting it with some polished deep slate, which is what we're going to be using here, and that just comes across. And then we're going to be using some of the deep slate tiles to actually come down the roof itself. So as you can see, with this end wall for the gable, you will bring down the different sides of the roof next to this end wall, which gives you actually something that can be built against. And normally these end walls have some kind of a topper, so I'm going to use a polished andesite to differentiate them from the actual roof itself. We've got the same here, so we'll do just a little bit here. This is just an end entranceway, but in the same way you want to be taking a beam that just goes across here, and then you can build against that like so, and you can put your top piece, which is the peak of your roof, on top of that. So this is the simplest way to link a roof in. You just have it butting up against a wall. But what happens when you have something like this where it's a little bit lower? Well, first of all, just let me fill in this portion of roof and I can show you what the best thing to do is. Once the highest portion of the roof is done, it actually makes connecting up the lower portions quite easy. What we need to do is we go to this wall, the gable side, and we bring out our beam right the way to the roof, and we actually want to bring that into the roof itself. Then we can use our apex material, which is the polished deep slate, and we can do that. And then once we start placing these tiles, then it will actually connect up and do all of the hard work for us. We can then take out a couple of these blocks, but when we do bring this across, if we place the stairs the right way up, of course, that always helps, and in the right place, then it simply all connects up and you get a lovely look of the roof connecting up, and this flawlessly linking into the roof itself. Now you could leave the roof like this and it looks really good anyway. However, this is a good example of where adding some realism can really level up the build itself. So in real life, where you have a link between two sections of roof like this, you would have a membrane or some kind of connector that would damp proof it and stop water from pooling in these areas. And you can do this by using the same material that you've got for the apex here, which is the polished deep slate. And for this bottom one, you can just have it going to the side. So we'll take the stair and we'll put it here, and then we'll replace on the diagonal all the ones going right the way up to the top here, and then down the other side as well. So if we put these in place like so, one more at the bottom here, then as you can see, you've got that coursing that will go up and down and really just adds that extra little element. Now, what if we want to connect in a roof type that doesn't have a gable, so something that we don't have the beam at the top that we can use? Well, simply we just need to make sure we get up to the right level that we want to connect for, and we can do that by finding the middle of this block, and that will be here. And I would suggest when you're building roofs, you can build them with a 2 center, because you get your roof bits that just come to an apex like this. But it's so much easier to do it when you've got a odd number. So try and make your builds with an odd number. And then what we're going to do is we're going to staircase up, and we're going to come up with some temporary blocks like this to bring our roof up to the right height. One more block, I think, to bring us to the right place. And once we've done that, we can then use this as the starting point to bring our beam across, and we connect that into the roof. And if it's not in the top like it is here, it happens to be lined up, that's absolutely fine, because it will just finish in the same way that this one does. But in this particular instance, we can then bring our apex material back through, get rid of these, and then we will be able to use the tiles to connect in and put our corner material in again. And then we build down from the top. So on this side, we'll need to get rid of this. Make sure that we're careful to click in the right place, because placing stairs can otherwise be a complete pain. And do this, and if we just carry on like that all the way to the bottom, and when that's done and the corners have been switched out, it all looks like part of one roof. And as you can see, that now looks fantastic. So the key thing to remember is make sure that you have odd numbers for your builds, and make sure that you start at the top and work your way down. And even if we'd had an overhang like this on a roof, which is quite common, you can just have the same thing. It would still connect up on the corner like so. And yeah, it would still look great. But obviously this style in particular doesn't have an overhang, but I think it does look really good. When it comes to Asian and fantasy builds here, then it's important to note a couple of things. Firstly, they are far more complicated than your basic roof structures. So make sure that you do understand the basics of how roofs can link together before you start looking at these, because in essence, they are all combination roofs. They've got various different elements that are built together into a single roof design. And the next thing to do is make sure that you have a clear vision of what you want the outcome to be achieved. So for example, this pagoda is based on a real life one in Japan. So I had plenty of photos to work from different angles to make sure that it did end up looking like I wanted it to look. Similarly, this castle is based on various different Japanese castles there. Once you've done that, you can break it down into its constituent parts. So you can break down the roof into the simple bits. And by that, I mean things like this entire section across the front is just a simple half slab step up from the roof itself, so quite a low pitched roof, and then it's just the detailing on the corners that sets this aside from a regular build. If you need to build the actual flat roof first, you can do. And here we've got these sloping arches. I would suggest planning these on the floor level so that you can actually make sure you've got the curve that you want before you start putting this on the build, because otherwise you can get yourself really mixed up in terms of what you want to do. When it comes to fantasy roofs, you've got this element called a saddleback roof that is quite popular. Now, this is actually from reality, where over time the roof structure the weight of the roof has pulled down the actual beam that goes across and created this archway, this reverse archway, this indentation at the top of a roof. To create one of these, starting from the top, you want to make sure you've got the curve that you want, and that is the key thing. Once you've got that curve, you can then build off that. You can fill in the gaps till you get to that curve, and then eventually you're probably going to find that it goes back to a regular roof pattern. But you can have these as extreme as you want. The more extreme, the more complicated, and if you've got quite an extreme one, I would suggest running a line of blocks to give you the curve that you want from the middle of the roof right up to the top, and then break that into sections and then put another curve there, and then you're just linking up the different lines of blocks that you've got, and that will give you a smoother transition. Where it comes to fantasy builds, you've also got these detailing elements that you can add, which do make the roof look fantastic, as do things like big chimneys and things like that. With chimneys, just make sure that you've got something inside that reflects it. So you've got a fireplace. This is a blacksmith, so we've got a big section here where you've got the furnace, and then the roof that needs to come up to take all of the smoke away from that. But adding those little details can really set off your roof. And obviously, if it's fantasy, you don't want anything to be too regular. You want it to be a little bit all over the place, something like this. For domes and spires and more complex roofs, then these add another element of complexity. So people quite often get off-put by domes, but actually domes are probably the easiest of these types. For me at least, you create a circle, and then you create a semicircle going above, across the middle, and another one going across the other direction. And then that cuts it into 4 quarters, and on one of those quarters you can just experiment or create the lines of the dome to fill it in, and then replicate that all the way around. The good thing about domes is that they are rotationally symmetrical, which means that they are the same all the way around, and that works for builds like this, but it also works for things like this. So when I created this observatory, then actually I created the entirety of the dome and then added this cutaway, and then the bit that I removed, I basically shifted it a block out like it had slid over the top. So little details like that can make all of the difference, but don't try and build it to look like this. Build the basic structure and don't be afraid to remove blocks from that. Where it comes to something like a spire or a cathedral roof, obviously these have got quite a high pitch in general, and you want some various different spires to go alongside those. With a spire itself, I would say the block selection is very important. Choosing blocks where you've got availability of walls makes all the difference, because it allows you to taper much more effectively and create a nice smooth spire design. Also, make sure that you're planning these on the floor. So build up a line of blocks to the height that you want your spire to be, build out the size of the base around that, and then you can start trying to create a smooth line that transitions from the top to the bottom. And you can start that with blocks and then add in things like these walls and other things, maybe like fences, or some things like the iron bars at the very end to get the real sharp pinnacle on the top. So again, just break it down into its constituent parts. The final type of design to look at is the super complex roofs that you get, which quite often are in a fantasy style. So this is my take on a build that I saw that was by a builder called Grayson, and I will link his Twitter in the description for the original, but this is a slightly bigger version, and this is the witch hat style roof. So obviously you haven't got much that you can do in terms of breaking this down. You really do have to build this up, say again, build up the height that you want it to be, and then build the rim is what I did to say, well, what do I want the rim pattern to be? And then I took a number of lines of blocks to try and create the curves from the different sections down to the edge, and then just filled in the gaps in between. But yeah, this is more at this point of an organic structure than it is a roof. I hope you've enjoyed the series so far. The most important thing about building is keep practicing and trying new things. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on the next episode, which will be covering landscaping and terraforming. Let me know in the comments any other topics you'd like to see, and check out the video that YouTube thinks you'll like right here.